Hello and welcome to the Herdline Podcast, hosted by Trace Johnson and the Herds Headset. Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode where the Headset and Trace talk all things Marshall athletics. Be sure to follow us on X and subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, or wherever else you listen to podcasts. Now, sit back, relax, and let's talk the herd.
Welcome back to the Herdline Podcast. Trace and the Herds Headset with you as we get ready to take a look at our next basketball coach. Obviously, we started with one of the greatest coaches we've ever had, Dan D'Antoni, and then we were lucky enough to have him on an episode right after that to talk all about it, and what an excellent conversation that was. If y'all haven't listened to that, go check that out. Dan's just an awesome guy, as you already know that, and he gets so many great stories and moments. We thank him again for coming on. Great moment there for us as a duo doing this podcast for sure. But we're going to take a look today at the era that preceded the D'Antoni era, being the Tom Herrion era. And it was a very up and down era. You had 4 years with Tom Herrion, and you had some really good and you had some really bad. So we're going to unpack all of that today. But before we get into that, I know you've been busy here lately, man. How's it been rolling for you here lately?
Yeah, been good, man. Life's a whirlwind, as you know, but nevertheless, we're still in the pot. We're still getting it done. And I'm pumped up to talk about Tom Herrion today. You know, he's definitely one of the most polarizing coaches because he was exciting, and we'll get to talking about him a little bit more in just a second. But I really enjoyed his tenure, and like you said, though, at the back end, it's just like, man, what happened? So I'm looking forward to breaking it down, talking a little bit more about Mr. Herrion, and I think this will be a great episode for everyone to listen to.
No doubt, man. I mean, there was a lot of excitement. He brought a ton of excitement. I mean, especially those first couple of years, man, he really, the momentum that they had at that point, he really kind of furthered that momentum into a point where they hadn't been in a long time. And we're going to get to that. But yeah, I mean, early on, it was rolling really good. I mean, I thought the guy was going to end up being like a national championship coach at some point, not from Marshall, but somewhere else. I was like, man, and this didn't quite work out, but we're going to dive into all that. So we're going to start with a little bit of Tom Herrion's past, a little bit. Well, first of all, right off the bat, he was hired officially on April 10th, 2010 to replace Donnie Jones, who we've talked about on here as the traitorous guy that he was. He left for UCF, who at that point was a conference foe of Marshall's, and obviously that led to a whole other issue in its own right between those two teams, which we'll get to on this episode some. So he came in and very heralded guy at that point. I mean, he had been all over. He had been a head coach. Looking at some of his assistant stops he has had, he was an assistant at Merrimack, which is actually his alma mater. He played there for a couple years. He was also an assistant at Cambridge, Rindge, and Latin School. I have no earthly idea what that is, but go off, Tom. I don't know. And then after that, he was an assistant at Providence and Virginia, two very good basketball programs. And then he was also the head coach at the College of Charleston from 2002 to 2006 and had a lot of success there, 80-38 as a head coach. They won a Southern Conference regular season title in 2003, an NIT appearance, and they were actually in the top 25 that year at one point. So had a lot of success there. And I don't really know. I mean, even in his last year or two, even though they slightly started dipping down, like, I don't know why they wouldn't have kept him. I don't know if it was a mutual thing. I don't know if he wanted to, I don't know what the story was. I don't know if they just wanted to get rid of him and move somewhere else and, into a different direction. But he ended up becoming the assistant, one of the assistants at Pitt under Jamie Dixon from 2007 to 2010. And that was when Pitt was really on fire in basketball. Jamie Dixon had them at a huge level, and Tom Herrion was a very big key to that. And then after that, he comes in and he gets the Marshall job, and you're thinking, well, this is a great hire. I mean, this guy's got a lot of pedigree, and he's, well-traveled dude that's been everywhere and coached with a lot of great coaches and been a successful head coach. So he checked all the boxes at that point. So, I mean, I remember when he was hired, I very vividly remember the Donnie Jones leaving to UCF news. I think I found that out in my music appreciation class in high school. So I remember all that very well. So talk a little bit about the infancy stages there of Tom Herrion getting hired.
Well, I mean, you got to think about the time period about all of these things. Donnie Jones was hired, and we'll talk about him eventually, but he was hired during a time, I would argue, maybe the most pivotal time in all of Marshall history. Because as you're moving up from the MAC to the Conference USA, I think Marshall was really trying to solidify itself as we are a premier program, and we're not just satisfied with being in the Conference USA, but we want to be able to bump up to that next level.
Yeah.
And Donnie Jones, I mean, like I said, we'll talk about him at some point, but he did get them to a place where they were on the right track for success. And when he left for UCF for more money and different things, it obviously rubbed a lot of us the wrong way. And that really made it in a very unique situation for Marshall, because the next hire had to be a home run. You know, if we wanted to be able to be a contender and keep the arena filled up and have fans in the stands and different things like that, then you need to make sure that you bring in a guy that's going to see immediate success, that's going to build off of what Donnie Jones had just laid down for us. And, on paper, Tom Herrion was the guy. I mean, it's unique. The College of Charleston, you mentioned that a moment ago, they're a very well respected and very historical basketball school.
Yeah.
And I was doing a little bit of research, like you said. I mean, he was winning game like 20 plus games almost every single season, right there on the edge at the bare minimum. And the reason why that he left the College of Charleston is he got fired. He did.
Wow.
And even though he was seeing success, even though he was being able to, do some good things, ticket sales were going down for some reason, and they didn't go on, I guess you could say, into a further extent in the postseason, March Madness, and different things like that. So he was fired. He was let go, and again, he went to Pittsburgh, did some different things. And on paper, here's a guy that was winning 20 plus games at another mid-major program. And we are a program that was on the rise, won 24 games the year before, and just saw Hassan Whiteside come and go. And him getting to the NBA was a big deal. And so, I mean, he was definitely somebody that it made complete sense to be able to hire. And man, he's just an energetic guy. I mean, I can remember, so much about those years that he was here. He was always just really fun to watch. I mean, if you ever went to the Marshall basketball games, you'd obviously like to watch the team, but sometimes it's more fun to watch him on the sidelines. I mean, he was going crazy most of the time and had that thick, I guess you could say, like New Jersey accent and whatnot. And he was just, he was a fun coach to kind of listen to and watch. But for some reason or another, we're going to find that towards the end of his tenure, he just couldn't get things put together. And so it'll be an interesting conversation for sure. But at the first part, I mean, I can completely understand as to why Marshall was interested and why they hired him, because on paper, there was really not a whole lot of guys that would have been better to be able to fit what Marshall was trying to do. And it should have worked, but for some reason it didn't.
Yeah, it's a strange situation. And honestly, I truly believe, and I know it's easy to say after a coach doesn't have success or whatever, oh, it wasn't a great hire, but I think it was a really good hire. And it worked out that way for about half of his tenure. But after that it just kind of went south, and we're not really can't quite figure that one out. But if you just looking at his first season as head coach in the 2010-2011 season, that was a very good year. And, that was coming off of the year where Donnie Jones had got them to a 24-10 record. And that was the most games they had won in quarter century at that point. So, they had started to really turn the corner as a program. And then Tom Herrion comes in year one. Now, granted, he had a lot of Donnie Jones holdovers, which is a reoccurring theme that we're going to talk about a lot in this episode. But he had a lot of Donnie Jones guys, and he brought in some of his own guys, sprinkled in there as well. They go 22-12 in his first year at the Herd, 9-7 in Conference USA. That was kind of their downfall. They kind of didn't have the greatest conference record. They let some games slip. But, I mean, if you just look at the overall season, you cannot be anything but impressed with it, because they had some big wins that year. Looking at the one right off the bat, they had a win over number 21, West Virginia, 75-71 in Charleston. That was Tom Herrion's first game against the team where, if you remember the year before, the West Virginia fans threw a quarter at his eye when he was a Pitt assistant. So he got a little bit of revenge there, but good for him. Good for, everything, beating them. But that was a nice win there. And then not too long after that, within a couple of weeks or so after that, they beat Memphis for the first time ever in Conference USA play at home at the Cam, 85-70. I remember that game, electric atmosphere. I mean, absolutely electric atmosphere. One of the best I can remember. And then obviously they cap it all off with the win of all wins in that season, because UCF comes to Huntington, and Donnie Jones, obviously that's his new team. At the first meeting that they had, UCF, if you remember, they actually started out they were undefeated to start that year. They were really, really good. They were top 25, but then after that, it kind of went downhill for them, but they were still a good team, and they came to town, and in the most intense environment I've ever been a part of, still to this day, sold out crowd at the Cam, 9,000 plus, the most that you could ever get in there. It was there. It was intense. You could cut the tension with a knife. I mean, it was something special. And Marshall just really handles them from the start. They were not going to let that emotion go to waste. They beat them 83-69. And despite it only being a 14-point win, they were up 20 most of that game. And they kind of just let them, get a little closer at the end. But phenomenal game there. And then they go to the Conference USA tournament and have a 97-87 win over Houston before eventually losing to UTEP 77-65. And in those days, UTEP was very good in basketball. So that was not that unexpected. And then the Herd ends up getting another bid, and they accept another invite to the CIT, collegeinsider.com tournament. They had been there the year before, but this year they decided to roll the dice again. Not a very good performance. 65-64 loss to Ohio in the first round at the Cam. So pretty much could have done without that, at that point. But, man, they had a lot of talent on that team. DeAndre Kane was the Conference USA Freshman of the Year that year. Demir Pitts was a junior. Shaquille Johnson, Dago Pena, they were both juniors. Terrell Baines was a senior. Nigel Spikes was there. I mean, these are very good players for the Herd that did a lot of good things for a numerous amount of years. So they had a lot of talent. There's a little bit of inconsistencies, but you're still a 22-win team, and you had all those marquee wins. So it was a good year, no doubt about it. So talk a little bit about that first year there under Herrion.
Yeah, so I mean, great moments. You beat Ohio in the regular season. That's a win over one of your rivals. You beat a ranked at the time West Virginia. That's a real big win over one of your rivals. Beating Memphis, of course, was a huge thing. But, like you mentioned a moment ago, the most electric atmosphere that I have ever recalled at the Cam Henderson Center was whenever we played UCF, whenever Donnie Jones came back to town. And, man, I just remember, it was a tense place. And when they introduced Donnie Jones as the head coach, as they always do, it was just radiating, man. I can't describe it because I don't remember a time ever that the Cam has been like that. I just don't. There's been some really good moments, and there's been some fantastic crowds, and we've done a great job. But that particular game was just it was sold out. Not a seat was open. Everybody was there for one reason, and that was to hate Donnie Jones' guts. Yeah. And we did a fantastic job at that. I mean, we really did. I mean, we were so good at hating him. So, and that was just a really, really, really awesome moment. We felt vindicated, oh, well, look who won. That's kind of what our mentality was whenever we left that particular game. And as you mentioned, you go into the tournament, you win against a weak Houston team that year. Houston's better than that usually. They just were on a down season. And then people don't really understand that the Conference USA back in these days, man, they were so good. Basketball was so good from top to bottom. Memphis was always near the top. Houston was always near the top. UAB, man, they had some fantastic teams and just so many, many good teams that were in this conference during the time. And that kind of leads me back to my initial point. This was such a pivotal time because we were going to find out if Marshall really could be able to hang with the big dogs, so to speak. We were going to find out if there were going to be somebody that would be, we could go to what we were hoping, the Big East of those days, because conference realignment, it's kind of the same as it was right now, only a little bit different. It wasn't always about money. It was always about money, sure, but it wasn't fully about money just yet. And a lot of, the moving parts of if you were going to move up or not was going to be based upon your performance and the amount of money that you had. So if Marshall could have found a way to have that success well, they could have been in the American Conference, and they could have been able to see all these things happen. But when this first year of Herrion, though, it was a great start, I guess you could say. Losing to Ohio in the CIT first round at the Cam, that was obviously not something that is ideal. Kind of strange. Doesn't make a lot of sense, especially looking at the roster, because you mentioned it. I mean, just all timers. Demir Pitts,
Yeah,
one of the best point guards that we've ever seen at Marshall. I don't know why Dago Pena was like my favorite player. I don't
he's
know. I
great.
can't tell you why. I just loved him. Just a fantastic 3-point shooter, and he was always exciting. And from top to bottom, just that roster itself was a very special roster. I think a lot of people too don't give Nigel Spikes enough credit. He was
Right.
a fantastic center. I mean, he played very good defense. I really like to watch him play as well. So, looking at this first year, um, really, I mean, we are all filled with a lot of hope because it looked like that what Donnie Jones had created, well, then maybe we can continue on with that and go forward and see, consistently 20 wins and maybe seeing that Conference USA number of wins go up every single season as well. But the problem with it all that we're going to talk about in just a moment is that would be the best season that Tom Herrion would have, tragically. So the first year was fantastic. I mean, it was a good, start, I guess you could say. But from there, it's going to be a downward trajectory the rest of the way.
Yeah, you're right. And I mean, as far as the win total, yeah. I mean, he would go down every year from this point on. However, the second year, there's a little caveat to that, and that's what we're getting ready to dive into, because if you remember, and in my entire so it was the 2011-2012 basketball season, that and the 2014 football season were the most anticipated seasons that I've ever seen from Marshall Athletics in my life. It doesn't matter what. Since I've been a fan, there has never been more hype that I've ever witnessed before a season than those 2 years. Football in 2014 and then this basketball season. It was off the charts. I mean, we're talking, there were people saying, everybody said we were going to be in the tournament in 2011, 2012. Everybody said we could be a team that wins games in the tournament. Everybody said we could have been a Conference USA champion. And we were picked, and you just mentioned it. At that time, Conference USA was a very tough basketball league. We were picked number 2 in Conference USA that year, behind Memphis, who was the standard bearer for the last 5-10 years. And we were picked behind them, and a lot of people thought we could have beat Memphis that year. It was hype, man. I mean, it was serious hype. And to start it off out of the gate, they lived up to the hype. They ended up going 5-0 to start that year. And one of those wins being an overtime win, 73-69, at the eventual Big East tournament champion Cincinnati, who also was in the Sweet 16, I believe, that year. So an excellent non-conference win. And at that point, we were knocking on the door for a top 25 ranking. I mean, we were not that far off from that point. But then after that, we were inconsistent. Like, that's just the problem. We ended up losing a really close game to Ohio. The next game, I think we lost by like 2 points. And we missed like 17 free throws. It's like, that is just the ultimate just projectile vomit stat that you can ever hear. So we had a 5-0 start, but then we were inconsistent after that. Had a close game at Syracuse, number 3 Syracuse, 62-56. I mean, we made that game very competitive, and that was when Syracuse was really, really rolling with Jim Boeheim and all those guys, all the players he had at that point. And then, so even though we were a little bit inconsistent, we still got it going pretty good. We beat a good Belmont team that year. I mean, we had a lot of impressive wins, and we're going to go over it later. And then to start out conference play, you're 3-0 in the Conference USA. You get a big home game against UCF. Donnie Jones coming back to town. We win 65-64, and that was another one of the top 2 or 3 most exciting games I've ever been to. It wasn't a total sellout, but it was 8,500 people. I mean, if it was, there might have been a couple corners up in the very highest point open, but other than that, everybody was there. It was an exciting game. At that point, we were 13-4 and 4-0 in the conference. So you're thinking, okay, we're good to go here. Well, it didn't quite always work that way, because we end the regular season with a 5-8 record to finish 18-12 and 9-7. So very inconsistent. But we did get to the Conference USA tournament in Memphis that year, and boy, did we go on a run. First round, we beat SMU 74-56. We were the 6th seed. Then the second round, one of the most exciting, greatest games in Marshall basketball history, 105-100, 3 overtime win over Tulsa. I will never forget that game. I didn't even watch it. I was listening to it on my radio. I didn't even have that channel at that point. I was pacing throughout the house. It was insane. And then then the semifinal round, 73-62 win over Southern Miss. And Southern Miss that year was a 9 seed in the NCAA tournament. We had beaten them twice in 2 weeks. Twice in 1 week. So that was huge. And then, of course, we draw Memphis on their home court for a championship, and then they kind of beat the brakes off of us, 83-57. Didn't quite work out. But, man, you really had hope at that point that we actually could have snuck into that NCAA tournament because we were the highest-rated team in RPI. This is before they started doing, like, the quad one and all that stuff. It was just pretty much RPIs, I think. We were the highest-rated RPI team in the country that did not make it to the NCAA tournament that year. I don't remember the exact number. I think it was like 40 or 42. So that's very good. We had a top 25 strength of schedule. We played a very tough schedule. We had signature wins over Cincinnati, Iona, who was at that point one of the best mid-majors in the country. They were a 25-win team, NCAA tournament team. We beat them bad. Beat Southern Miss twice. Beat Belmont. We had some very good wins. And unfortunately, though, we do only get to the NIT, which we had not been to the NIT since 1988. So it had been 24 years since we had been to the NIT, and we don't even get a home game. We're a 5 seed on the road. That's one of the biggest, like, tragic results in sports I've ever seen. Like, it really is. The highest rated team to not make the NCAA tournament has to go on the road in the first round. Are you kidding me? That was a crime against humanity at that point. Awful, awful turn of events. And we have to go on the road at 4 seed Middle Tennessee, who was good at that year, obviously. And then they beat us 86-78. We just really came out of the game flatter than a pancake in that one. It was just a bad start. And we just can't dig ourselves out of the hole enough, lose by 8. So we go 21-14 overall. I mean, that's another 20-win season. We had all those guys back, Shaq Johnson, Doggo, Pena, Demir Pitts. They were seniors that year. You also had Dennis Tenen coming in from the JUCO ranks, probably Herrion's best recruit that he ever got, probably to Marshall. He had 2 years. He was the junior college leading rebounder before he came to Marshall. He was a monster that year, double machine. Robert Goff, another junior college guy, really good big guy. They added a lot of talent, man, and it was a good season, very good season, based on a lot of different things, big wins, getting to the NIT and all that kind of stuff, going on a big Conference USA tournament run. But it was also a little bit of an underwhelming season because we had such high expectations. So it's like you kind of have to ride the wave between both of those. So talk about that 2011-12 season there.
Yeah, well, and I mentioned a second ago, this is it was even with all of those wins at the back end of the year with the tournament, they still didn't get to the amount of wins they had the year before. And that just makes me almost sick to my stomach when you look at something like that because, if they would have been able to stay consistent, if they would have been able to just win the games that they're supposed to win, this could have been an all-time season. And this could have been a season to where they didn't even have to win the tournament to be able to get into the NCAA tournament, but losing to Ohio, that was, like you mentioned, it was just a nauseating loss. Like, you come off one of the biggest wins in program history at Cincinnati. You ought to beat Ohio at home and just couldn't do it. And then losing to Belmont, losing to Akron back-to-back. I mean, both of those is just like, man, what in the world was happening? What took place? Because this is a completely different team than what was at the start. And again, we see that the biggest trouble for these Marshall teams, it's very interesting because it's almost the opposite of what D'Antoni's era would have been. D'Antoni usually would, not do great at the start of the season, but then really pick it up at the end. And as we kind of look back, the history of Marshall had always been they have a pretty good non-conference slate. They'll have a winning record and things, but when they get to the conference, well, it's kind of up in the air. They might win 9 games, they may win 4 games. Who knows? So it would be an amazing thought of what would happen if there was just a little bit of consistency in beating some of these tough Conference USA teams. But Ultimately, it was great to see him go on the big run there in the tournament, and that was exciting, of course. Something that brought a lot of energy, and even not winning it, going to the NIT was such a big deal because, as you mentioned, it's the first time they made it a long, long time.
Yeah.
And I was thinking, I didn't even know Middle Tennessee State existed back in these days. Like
Right.
this is back whenever Middle Tennessee, Western Kentucky, all those other little schools, like they were little schools.
Mm-hmm.
Marshall was on the rise, and I had never heard of these other places. And so I was thinking, well, it stinks that we didn't get a home game, but surely we'll go to Middle Tennessee State and beat them, right? Well, things just didn't end up that way, sadly. And Middle Tennessee would actually be a thorn in our side for a while. And I'd come to know who they were very quickly after this. But overall, this was an all-time roster. This is one of the best rosters, top to bottom, that Marshall ever had. And it really is a tragedy to see the inconsistencies and to see the fact that they weren't able to really put it all together. And when all of those guys that were seniors left, there was so many holes in this roster. And let's just face it, there's a couple guys. There's one in particular that we're going to talk probably a lot about here in just a second that Herrion brought in. But for the majority of it, he just couldn't replace those guys, and he couldn't coach them up the same way that we saw with Donnie Jones. And the next 2 seasons of the Herrion era would be really all-time lows, especially, again, got to put yourself back in that mind frame. If you're Mike Hamrick, the athletic director, if you're a big Green supporter, you're putting money into the program, you have to win right now because everything's going to get, mixed up here in just a couple seasons. The American Conference is going to exist. WVU and all them are really just about to go to the Big 12. If not, 2012 is whenever they did go to the Big 12. And so we see that there's things shifting. So they need success right now to get up a good resume for the next level. And it just fell apart as classic Marshall fashion. It just seems to do sometimes.
Well, I was going to say the exact same thing. I was going to say, but especially with men's basketball, it's just like we would have such good periods of time where we were like rolling on and clicking on all cylinders, and it would just all come crashing down, like inevitably every single time. And it's like, I don't know why that is. I'm not sure, but it's definitely been the case for many, many coaches. And that's kind of what starts happening here with Tom Herrion. And even though that 2011-12 season was very good based on a lot of different aspects, big wins, making the NIT, all that kind of thing, you started kind of getting the sense that there was some potential ego issues and leadership issues with the team a little bit. Some guys maybe thinking they were a little bit more superior than other guys on the team. You kind of started getting that sense, and that kind of started really rearing its ugly head in the last couple of years, like just locker room kind of issues. And I mean, obviously not going to, I don't know what the details on, but you just had that sense. You started hearing those whispers, and I think that really started to play out before our very eyes. So if you look at the 2012-13 season, big expectations again. Now they weren't. I don't remember it being as big as the year before, but I remember a lot of people thinking Marshall might have a chance again, to go some places. But the biggest difference with this team and the year before is you lost a lot of talent from that last team a year before that. You had Shaquille Johnson, Doggo Pena, and Demir Pitts, the big three, as I pretty much always called them that. They were gone. They were all seniors. They were gone. But you did have DeAndre Kane back. You had Dennis Tenen back. Nigel Spice was the senior. Robert Goff was back. You had good players. But the one thing that they were missing more than anything else that year was a true point guard. Because if you remember, Tom Herrion recruits Kareem Canty, who at that point was a top 20 point guard recruit in the country at a high school. You're thinking, well, this is going to be awesome. But he's ineligible that year. I don't remember the details, why he was. I don't even remember. But he was ineligible that year. And then that forces them to pivot to DeAndre Kane running the point, who did a very good job, very admirable job of doing so. But for 2 years, he was not a point guard at Marshall. So he was forced into that role. And he had it, he did a very good job with it, but they were still missing something. And if you look at that early season non-conference slate, man, the schedule was brutal really brutal. You play Villanova, WVU, number 11 Cincinnati, and Kentucky, all in non-conference play. That is a brutal non-conference schedule. And that was the year that Cincinnati, for some odd, peculiar reason, decided they didn't want to play us in Huntington, so they played us in Charleston. That made no sense whatsoever. Absolutely no sense at all. And, of course, we lose all those games. And, we just had a rough kind of go of it. I don't know what it was. And there was a couple losses here that I wrote down that still are just mind-boggling losses. So you have a loss at Ohio, 94-57. And then you have a loss at Southern Miss, 102-46. Tom Herrion has to come out and apologize for the team's effort after that game. So at that point, you knew something was off. Something was going wrong. There was something majorly flawed with this team, and that's the locker room thing, the ego issues, the leadership issues. That was that. There is no way that you go out there and you lose by 60 points. There's no way that is even feasible at that. Like, they weren't that bad. So that was an effort issue, and it was just bad, man. It was just a bad turn of events. But the only saving grace to that season, quite frankly, was the fact that they beat UCF twice. That was great, because Jones was still at UCF, beat them twice. That was great. But unfortunately, we do get to the Conference USA tournament and lose early, 66-64 to Tulane. We go 13-19 overall, ended up 6-10 in Conference USA. Just not what you wanted at all there. And you knew you were losing a lot of talent from that team. That was the scary part, is you knew a lot of those guys were gone. I mean, Tenen and Goff were gone. They exhausted their eligibility. DeAndre Kane ends up going to Iowa State the next year and has a huge year for Iowa State. And you just knew you were losing guys. So it was going to be essentially a total rebuild after that. And that was the scary place to be. Effort issues, leadership issues, not having your true point guard in there, all that stuff, I think, affected this season tremendously. So talk about that 2012-13 season.
Yeah, like you said, it's a disappointment. And it's hard. Like, I agree with everything that you mentioned a moment ago. There was definitely off the court issues that were just circulating around the team. You started hearing certain things, and I've heard some things about potentially DeAndre Kane. Again, I don't know anything. I'm not trying to speculate, but he's a fantastic player, and he was the kind of guy. I mean, he liked to score points, he liked to have the ball, and
yeah.
I think Herrion really wanted him to be more of a systematic player because he wanted to be, team. So there was definitely some butting of the heads, and we saw that on the court, as you mentioned. Like, some of these games, it wasn't just losing by a couple points, but I mean, they're getting absolutely blown out. And the craziest part of it all was they get blown out by Southern Miss for, like you said, 46-102, and then the very next game they lost by 1 point to Memphis.
Right.
So they had talent, they had the ability. It's just that they were not willing, I think, to be able to work together as a team all of the time. And that whenever you get to a place like that, that's a very dangerous place to be in as a team overall, because you're just not going to have the success that's needful. You're not going to be able to get to that next level. And there were some setbacks, and you got to put that on Herrion, because, I mean, yeah, Kareem Canty was academically ineligible, but if he was your only point guard on the team, guess what? You didn't do a very good job at recruiting.
Right.
So, we saw some of those insufficiencies too. I mean, yeah, he sent the house for Kareem Canty, but at what cost? No other point guard was able to step up. That just doesn't make sense. So this was really one of the worst basketball seasons that we had seen in a while, because, I mean, you think about it, Donnie Jones got them to a pretty good spot, and Tom Herrion the first 2 years was still very, successful. But this was just a year that was just like, what in the world's going on? And fans started to get incredibly impatient. I would say that fans got incredibly impatient after the NIT loss. Mm-hmm. That's whenever people started to talk. And there was more of a sense of urgency back in the day with fans too. I mean, I think that Marshall fans sometimes can be unrealistically fair whenever they kind of view certain coaches. D'Antoni talked about that a little bit on our podcast the other day. But this was especially true back in these days because, just as the administration was focused on, well, we want to be a part of the American Conference. We want to do this. We want to do that. We were the same way. I mean, we
Yeah.
want to be in the Big East. We want to play West Virginia every single season. We wanted to play Cincinnati every year. We wanted to play Louisville every single year. That was the desire. That was the goal. So to see all that kind of take place, I mean, that's just kind of deflating, and it was just a rough season overall. And I'm just real thankful that Marshall football was good that year because it would have been miserable altogether.
Yeah, it was a very, very strange season. A very just unfortunately bad season. And, like I said, they did lose those 3 top guys from the last 4 years, but man, there was still enough talent on that team to where they should have been nowhere near 13 and 19. I mean, that should have been 19 and 13. That should have been that caliber of season. If they had, there was obviously effort issues. Obviously, that's just, there's no way and that Southern Miss game, it was like, I remember at one point the score was like 46-8 or something in that game. I mean, it was just like, it was like playing a high school team. I mean, it's like, you're not even trying, like you're not even giving remotely any effort whatsoever. And like, there's too many good players on this team to be doing that. It was just bad. And that's the scary part about it. Like I said before, is the 2013-14 season, you had a lot gone. You had essentially everything gone at that point. It was essentially a rebuild, total rebuild. Kane's going on to Iowa State. Tennon's gone. Goff's gone. Spikes is gone. Canty is eligible this year. Canty's able to play, but they were a very, very young team. They only had 2 seniors on that team, Elijah Pittman and Use Mbao. If you remember, Elijah Pittman could score like nobody's business. It's just, he didn't quite work out and pan out like in the human being side of things, if I recall. And then Use Mbao was just a big body that really couldn't do a whole lot offensively. So like that was your 2 seniors that you had. I mean, there was not much there. You have a decent start. You're 4-2 out of the gate, playing a pretty bad non-conference schedule early on. But then after that, you lose 11 of your next 13 games. And one of those 2 wins is against a Division II school. So just didn't really do much there. There's really not much to even say about this season besides the fact they just weren't very good. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. Really not any plays. There's certain moments that stand out to me. Also, the year before is when they had D.D. Scarver. Scarver, if you remember him, he was a really good player for Marshall. He didn't last. He wasn't there very long, but Scarver was a very good player. I don't think he was on this team. I don't think he was. I think he was just a 2-year guy, 1-year guy. But, yeah, they had some struggles this year, obviously. They finished 10-21 in the regular season. I mean, you had a 21-loss regular season. That's pretty brutal. Get to the Conference USA tournament. I don't even know what their seed was, but they ended up winning 1 game in it. They beat FAU 63-59 before losing to ODU 73-58 in the next round. So all in all, they go 11-22 and 4-12 in the Conference USA in regular season. That's just not going to get it done. And the crowds were very, very low after, towards the end of that season. There was like no interest. There was apathy. There was just not much going on there. And then they sensed that they had to make a change. And then they end up, Herrion officially resigns after that season, quote unquote resigns. And then they end up moving on to Dan D'Antoni, and we know the rest is history there. But not a very good final year, not a good final 2 years. But talk about that 2013-14 season, because that was definitely not the way anybody wanted to go out, I'm sure.
Well, and let's just call it like it is too. To be clear, this was the first year of the brand new Conference USA. So talent in the conference went way down. This is not Memphis anymore. This is not Houston. This is not those premier programs that you're having to face week in and week out. Like we're playing a Florida Atlantic team that was historically bad.
Yeah.
And you're playing, Charlotte was decent back in these days, but like North Texas and whatnot. So this is not a very good basketball conference. It's an okay one, but it's not a great one anymore. And to see the overall performance that we were, able to put out there on the court is incredibly disheartening. It was just bad. The only bright spot on the entire team was Kareem Canty. I mean, you walked away from that season like, man, he's the guy that you're going to build around and do some great things, and you hoped and whatnot. But we all know what would happen that very off season. That it's very strange because if you're us trying to like give a retrospective of all these programs, we can almost kind of skip over what happened. But whenever Dan Toney came back in, we were all thinking, "All right, great, he's going to coach up Kareem Canty. We're going to be fine." Well, Kareem was out of here, man. Like
He was out.
He did not want anything to do with Marshall, and it was messy, and it was bad, it was brutal, and he got a lot of hate. I think that's really one of the first guys that I can remember that was on like the internet and Twitter and whatnot that like got shunned by the fans.
Right.
Donnie Jones was an easy one. Like that was, clearly public enemy number one. But from a player's perspective, transferring, leaving, and different things, that's the first guy that I can remember really from Marshall basketball side of things anyway, where he would leave and it would be like, okay, that's not what are we doing here, So to look at the ending here, I know that of course, Herrion resigned, but Mike Hamrick would later on say the quote, "We just didn't win enough basketball games." So he was fired. Make no mistake about it. He was definitely fired. And I hate it for him. I really did think that Herrion was a pretty good basketball coach, but I think that two things happened. Number one, he lost the locker room. He did not have control over some of those guys that were his star players, and that created a lot of contention, a lot of jealousy, a lot of problems inwardly. And then secondly, I think the biggest problem for Herrion was the fact that he didn't recruit very well. I mean, he had a couple guys that were great. I mean, Kareem Canty, top 20 point guard, and he would go on to play at Auburn and be a good player.
Yeah.
And he had some good. Dennis Tenen, another good example of a good player here at Marshall. But realistically, his teams were just not deep, and they were not fantastic as far as top to bottom is concerned. And so that was his undoing, no doubt. And so, I hate that it didn't work out for a lot of different reasons. That was the last ditch effort for Marshall to be able to move up to a bigger conference at the time. And he was the guy that we kind of put a lot of eggs in the basket, hoping he'd be the guy that got us there, and it just wasn't meant to be. So you hate it. I wish it was different. I wish that, we could look back on Tom Herrion overall and that we could remember him fondly. However, it just seems that that's just not in the cards, sadly. I mean, he's a great person. I'm sure he's a great guy, and he had a lot of good things to say even leaving Marshall. He didn't leave angry or on super bad terms. He understood. For me to be the coach here, I got to win more games because this is not a losing program. But, it is what it is. He finishes at 500 exactly, 67-67. And he gave us some great moments. Beat West Virginia, beat Cincinnati, beat UCF whenever it mattered the most. And so, overall, I'm not upset at the Herrion era, so to speak, because some of the most fun moments came with him being the coach. And he was an electrifying coach, too. I mean, I remember that. I don't remember the exact game it was. You may have to remind me. We've talked about it before, but
Yeah.
He gets on the PA mic and was like, let's go her. It was crazy. It was awesome.
Yeah.
So, overall, I think he was a good guy. And I think he was a good coach. He just didn't recruit real well, and I think he lost the locker room.
He definitely lost the locker room. Definitely feasted on the Donnie Jones recruits for sure. Like that was the bulk of his success, no doubt about it. A lot of his guys, quite frankly, I remember saying this or thinking this. I don't even remember exactly how I worded it, but there was two types of players that Tom Herrion recruited his own at Marshall: JUCO guys or character issue guys. That was what he recruited. And one of those examples comes to mind is, remember Justin Coleman? Because Justin Coleman was a stud, absolute stud. He was at Louisville with Rick Pitino, and he was really good player. And he just had issues off the court. And he was at Marshall, and he could jump out of the gym like nobody's business. but he was gone. He was gone too. Elijah Pittman, same thing. He was gone too. Kareem Canty, yeah, he didn't have off the court issues, but that man had drama everywhere he went. So that seemed to be the trend, is he wasn't recruiting necessarily the highest caliber of people. And that was one of the things that Dan D'Antoni talked about extensively on our podcast, is he wanted to recruit guys to where a father could bring his son and say, I hope you can be like that guy someday, because that guy is a good role model. And I think that was a stark contrast between the two coaches. And yeah, I mean, it's unfortunate how it ended, but I mean, the fact that we ended up getting Dan D'Antoni and doing what we did there for the majority of those 10 years, I'm fine with how it went. I really am. Yeah, I didn't like those last 2 years, but in the grand scheme of things, it wasn't that bad. Like, it wasn't like rock bottom. It was just like he was only supposed to be it was almost like he was only here to be a short-term coach just to set up somebody else. That's kind of ended up being how it went. But looking at his overall record or tenure a little bit, like you said, 67 and 67, 20, 25 and 26 kids would have absolutely loved that record. I'm just saying, they would absolutely eat that up. So that was interesting. 43 and 26 his first 2 years, 24 and 41 his last two. So just crazy difference. Like I said, he really benefited from the Donnie Jones recruits, Kane, Pitts, Johnson, Pena, Spikes, those guys. He really benefited from those guys, as anybody would, because that was before the transfer portal. He had great passion. He brought great excitement early for the Herd. And that game you're talking about, I believe that was the UCF game when they first came back. He said, you just created the best environment in college basketball. It was a hype situation. It was awesome. And, he brought a lot of excitement. The crowds were big those first couple years, big crowds. I mean, you're talking numerous games of 8,500, 8,000, 7,500, even one 9,000 plus game. You're talking big crowds. And that was because of what they had going on at that time. But then the excitement and the enthusiasm faded late pretty badly. I mean, the crowds were so low towards the end there, just very, very, very little excitement, if any excitement at all. It was just, you were just going through the motions. Fans were just kind of going through the motions. So it faded bad. He got into the first NIT since 1988. I mean, that was a big deal in its own right. Yeah, it would have been better if it was the NCAA, but getting back to somewhere where you hadn't been in 24 years is nothing to sneeze at. So that was a very nice accomplishment, despite the fact that they kind of crapped the bed when they made it to the NIT. But that's neither here nor there. He had locker room issues for sure. Definitely lost the locker room, had control issues. I just don't think he controlled the team very well. I think a lot of those guys kind of, I don't know, just their egos and their personalities were just too big for him to handle. I really think that's probably a lot of it. Leadership issues amongst players, all that stuff, all the whispers of all the different things that we talked about. And, just it sucked, because you knew that these guys were very good players, very talented players. They just didn't they just didn't apply it in the right way. A lot of these guys, and a lot of these guys were completely great people, great players. I'm not saying that at all, but there was a few here and there that kind of were issues. And that, I think that goes without saying. I think that's pretty much well documented at this point, but so it is what it is. But talk a little bit about, we got to finish off his era with a grade. Talk about what grade you're going to give Tom Herrion for his 4 years as the Herd's head coach.
I give him a C, just straight up average. Because like I said, he did give us good moments. It's not that, all the times were bad. I mean, 2 great seasons, fun atmospheres, some of the best atmospheres really of all time that Marshall had. And he was the guy that, kind of led the team, led the program there for those moments. And so, that's something that we can't just forget about. That shouldn't just be swept under the rug. Of course, he did benefit from Donnie Jones players, but guess what? He's also the one that coached them, and
Right.
he still was able to find success with them. So you can't knock him too much for that. I just give him a C. He was, I think he's the definition of just average, because he's 67 and 67.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he's a 500 coach. He had great moments, had really bad moments. And overall, I just think that that's really all that I could give him, is just a straight up C.
That's exactly what I gave him too. Straight up C. I mean, it does not get more C than 67 and 67. It just doesn't. Like it does. There's not much more that needs to be said. Another thing that I didn't even mention about that first year that he had that I kind of forgot about was the fact that, man, he was if Hassan Whiteside comes back that year, buddy, it's done. They're dancing that year. No question about it. Another year of the all-time freshman shot block leader from the year before coming back bigger, stronger, better with those players. Oh, yeah. No. 22 and 12 would have been more like 26, 27, 28 wins, in my opinion. They probably would have been in the tournament that year, but that's just hypothetical. Whiteside gets drafted. Obviously, we know his story, but it is what it is. And, it's not about how you start, it's how you finish, right? He just did not finish very well. Unfortunately, really thought he did a lot of good things early on, but then it kind of got away from him there. The wheels just kind of fell off, and the recruits, the talent level just seemed to diminish there, and a lot of guys getting few guys getting dismissed from the team and different things, and that was just not a good place to be. So I think a C is very fair for Tom Herrion's tenure there. And he's obviously was an assistant coach for many years after that too. So he didn't just go away from basketball, like he still coached and everything. So it is what it is. He served a good purpose for the Herd. And some of my, like I said to you, some of my fondest moments as a Marshall basketball fan or Marshall fan in general were under his regime by far. Some of the best moments that I've experienced. So can't take that away from him. But that being said, we have concluded this episode talking about the Tom Herrion era. We both think it was just a C era, and I think anybody could realistically see that, and that makes sense. But wish him luck on if he whatever. I haven't really seen what he's doing much lately, but hopefully he's doing well. But with that being said, man, if you got any last thoughts to talk about besides that, we're finished.
Yeah, I'm good, and go Herd.
All right, man. Well, with that being said, we're going to move on to our next episode. We're going to get to the coach we talked about a lot in this one. We're going to look at Donnie Jones coming up, and we're excited to get into that era because, boy, that was really the era that kind of set them up that kind of turned the corner for the program a little bit. And it was a lot of stuff going on there in those 3 years. He was only there 3 years, but there's a lot to talk about. So look forward to bringing that episode to you. But in the meantime, go Herd. We hope you enjoyed the episode. Later.